My name is Bermon Painter. I work for Slalom Consulting, based out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and it's a pleasure to be here in Atlanta today. In the role that I have at Slalom, I have sort of a dual-purpose role. One, I run an innovation function where a lot of this comes from. I also run our composable platforms team. We work with Contentful, Netlify, Vercel, a lot of stuff in Next.js. So this is sort of dev adjacent in how we apply the concepts of behavioral economics, essentially, to the product design work that we do. So I'm going to share a bunch of goodies today. The slides are going to be very dense, so be forewarned, because there's a lot of stuff that we're going to get through. I will make these slides available after the conference just so you all have it, so don't try and read everything. If you have eagle eyes, you'll probably do okay, but it's a lot of words. So let's dig in. The way we're going to break down the session this morning is I'm going to give you a basic overview of behavioral design, how we think about this, how we apply it. We'll go through a high-level view of our behavioral design model. This is how we do the product design work on the projects that we work on. And then we'll sort of break that down in detail into each step, realizing the right opportunities, going through what we call behavioral profiles. How do we architect and influence choice as people are going through digital experiences? And then how do we start to zero in on specific behavior changes that we want to try and influence? Then how do we experiment and validate? Wrap up with questions and anything that you all have. So before we begin, is there anything else, anything specific that you all would like to hear? And I'll make sure that I talk about it or weave it in. It's okay if you don't. You can raise your hand if you do. All right, we're going to get going. So quick overview. Basically, the way that we think about behavioral design is it's sort of this intersection between behavioral science, human-centered design, and behavioral economics. And we'll break those down in detail. So behavioral science, it's not a new field, but I personally find it very interesting. It's basically the study of human behavior. So it's very UX adjacent in what we do. And it dives deep into the various factors that influence the triggers that influence our decisions, from psychological triggers, from social interactions. It also combines a little bit of psychology, sociology, and anthropology. So it's really fun, especially for those in the room that have more of a UX lean versus technology. It's still fun for both groups. The other side of that is behavioral economics. I am not an economics person, but there are economic principles that are important to understand. So what behavioral economics essentially does is it explores the emotional, the cognitive, and the social factors that play into the financial decisions that we make. So things like choosing your 401k, or for anybody that works at an enterprise, we just had to go through our healthcare choices for next year. Some of that's opt-in, some of that's opt-out. But they're important financial choices depending on the choices that we make. And what that allows us to do is that we can apply behavioral economics to create more appealing services or offerings. We can optimize things like pricing structures or incentives. We can also enhance customer loyalty. And then the human-centered design portion is probably what most people are familiar with. It's all about empathy, understanding human beings, why they do what they do, and how do we apply design thinking as a way to solve specific problems? So it's extensive around research and prototyping and iterating on the experiences that we're trying to create to make sure that the products or services resonate with a specific audience. So high level, this is how the three of those sort of combine. Now, I'm going to share a few use cases because I think they're interesting in how companies are applying behavioral design in the real world. Out of curiosity, who uses Duolingo? Not as many people as I thought. There's a few. It's been a wild ride, I think, in the app over the last 12 months or so. They've kind of gone off the rails in a very fun and weird way. And they're doing all of that to try and influence your behaviors, right? The main purpose of Duolingo as an application is to make sure you're using the application on a daily basis so that you're learning languages. Now, they're doing a few interesting things around their approach to behavioral interventions, right? Essentially, how do they entice you or influence you to open the app, do your task, learn your languages? Uh, and basically, they've applied a trigger plus action plus reward to drive certain behaviors. They have a playbook, and they've broken that down into roughly 3 triggers. Trigger number 1 focuses on, we call it emotional manipulation. If you've seen the app icons that they've been coming out with, it feels like every month, every couple of weeks, they're wild. It's not what you expect when you go into your phone and you see this crazy app, whether it's a crazed Duolingo owl or a sick Duolingo owl or whatever that is. They're trying to trigger you to open the app. They're also using common things like regular push notifications to encourage you to complete your tasks. They also do email. So it's like some standard things there to try and trigger a specific behavior. Playbook 2 is routines. And if you use the app regularly, they're trying to get you into a consistent routine so you use it every single day. One of the things that they're doing as part of that playbook is they're using pre-commitments. So they're trying to pre-commit you to accomplish a task before you actually accomplish it. They're also using social nudging. So they might say something along the lines of, hey, so-and-so people in your area or your friends are also doing these types of things. Maybe you should too. They'll also use gamification with streaks, right? So I am a streak fiend. I've got to keep that streak going. It's a useful trigger for some people. The third one is around rewards. They do some fun celebrations in the app when you accomplish things, whether it's achievements or badges. They're also trying to give you a little bit of a dopamine hit by rewarding you for your successes. Now, what's that resulted for them over the last few years is a couple of years ago, they were around 16 million daily active users, which is pretty phenomenal for a mobile app. Their retention rate is out of this world. It's about 55%. There are very few apps that can accomplish that. And they're able to do that because they're applying behavioral economics, behavioral design to trigger people into doing certain behaviors. And at the end of the day, all right, they're still a business. So it's had some pretty good revenue growth for them. The next one is a company called Wealth. They're a medication adherence platform. And what I like about this space particularly is that they're actually impacting people's life for the greater good. So there's a problem with individuals that have chronic illnesses. Having them to continue to adhere to their medication routines is difficult sometimes. Sometimes people forget. Sometimes there's too many medications. Sometimes they can't keep them all straight. So what Wealth is intended to do is help patients that are struggling with medication adherence overcome that. They're using something that we call present bias that helps people overcome that specific bias so that they can improve their long-term health. Now, what they're doing is they're leveraging loss aversion and a mixture of a rewards program. So what they end up doing is they're trying to drive adherence to medication. That is their main goal. And they are essentially giving you an upfront cash reward through the application. And every day, or whatever the schedule is, you take a picture of you with the medication. They're assuming that you're taking the medication. And then every day that you don't do that, they deduct from that upfront cash reward. So every day that you don't adhere to taking your medication, you receive less money at the end of the day. Now, it's not money out of my pocket or your pocket. It's money out of the company's pocket because they're trying to drive adhesion to adherence to the medications. So they're applying loss aversion, which is essentially, if I don't take this medication, I'm going to lose money in its most simple level. Now, what they've seen by applying behavioral design is they're seeing sort of a 2x increase in adherence rates. On average, they're also achieving about 90% medication adherence levels and about a 40% reduction in hospital readmissions. So really phenomenal numbers where they're using behavioral design to influence people's behaviors for their own personal benefit. And then the third that I'll share, it's a Dutch commercial insurance broker. And what they wanted to try and do is they wanted to understand how they should position specific plan options so that customers select the best plan for their needs based off of quality and price. If you've gone through that process recently, there are a lot of options even here in the US. It's not great. as we go through that process. Now, because we have too many options, and from an economic standpoint, what typically happens for folks when they choose their health plans is they're either choosing a health plan that gives them too much coverage, so they're paying for a health plan that they don't use, or on the converse, they're buying a health plan that doesn't cover them enough, so they're paying too much out of pocket. So what the commercial insurance broker is trying to do is to balance that out, is to make sure that people choose the correct plan based off their needs without paying too much and not using the service, or paying too little and having to pay too much out of pocket. So they're doing a couple of things. They're focusing on some concepts that we call ordering or partitioning. They're trying to chunk relevant plans together that are most important to you based off of your needs, your family, etc. And then how they order those plans is also important. So in most cases, there's probably 15 to 20 different healthcare plan options, from like bronze, silver, gold, platinum, is at least what I saw when I did mine a couple of weeks ago. It's a lot. Based off what they know about me, I don't need 20 options. I probably need 2 or 3 that are most relevant to my situation. I've been paying into the same company for the last 5 or 6 years. They know me at this point, and it's that case for a lot of people. So what they've done, and what we're seeing is, if they order based off of price only, like standard easy thing, high to low price ordering with no partitioning, almost half the visitors, they just buy what's top of the list, right? Folks are a little bit, we spend a lot of time doing it, and probably should. When they do ordering plus partitioning, they see about a 13% increase of visitors that are buying health plans that are not in the first ranked alternative based off of price. So they're seeing a slight nudge in people buying the appropriate health plan based off of what they're trying to do there. Okay, now let's get to the meat of the content. So the behavioral design model that we use for most of our project work, it kind of breaks down like this. So we're going to go through it in detail, but at a high level, the first thing that we try and do is we're trying to identify insight-driven opportunities. We don't want to guess. And what that means is, if we're trying to spot the right opportunities to apply these concepts, we need to identify and address the most critical issues and understand where the right opportunities really exist. Now, this involves understanding current goals, identifying obstacles, aligning ideas to tangible business outcomes. Fairly standard fare for product design, with a little bit of a twist as we get a bit more into it. Now, one of the things that we do with stakeholders, specifically folks in business marketing, the folks that manage the purse strings, that can actually fund this work, is we're trying to base all of our insights, all of our recommendations on outcomes. If we do X or Y or Z, what outcome is it going to drive for the customer, the consumer, the patient, and then what will it drive for the business? We use a few templates. I'm kind of a big fan of Mad Libs. I feel like that's an easy way for stakeholders to quickly riff on some concepts and get them to do it consistently. So what we'll do is, one, we try to identify a clear problem statement. What is the core issue that is really affecting customers or their behavior? And we need to keep it clear and concise, and focus on the specific problem that we're going to try and address. So you probably can't see it in the back, but it's basically customers or patients or users, whatever your nomenclature is there, are exhibiting this specific behavior because of X, Y, and Z reasons, which results in some sort of a negative outcome. Those are the things that we're trying to avoid. So an example, customers are avoiding, or patients are avoiding, preventative care because they are unaware of its long-term benefits, which results in increased chronic health issues and higher long-term costs. So that's what we're trying to get them to frame, so we understand the problem space that they want to focus on. The second thing is really trying to reframe that as an opportunity. I don't like to sit in a negative space. We want to take that and flip to something that's a bit more positive, opportunistic. The template that we use is basically, if we address this specific behavior, we can achieve this positive outcome benefiting this target or these target customer segments. So it could be something like this. If we address the lack of awareness around preventative care, we can achieve a healthier customer base and reduce long-term healthcare costs, benefiting all customers. So in this case, it's going to apply to all of their segments. And then the third thing is we want to try and align that opportunity statement to specific business drivers. This makes sure that anything that we're suggesting, anything that we're going to explore, has a clear alignment to something that's going to drive value to the business. Hate to say it, but we do live in a capitalist society, specifically here in the U.S., and as designers or as developers, the more that we can elevate our language to speak to the people that are actually managing what's going on and managing the money, the higher chance of success we're going to have to do the rich research and the UX work that we all know is really important. But it's hard to do that if we're not speaking the same language. So what we'll do is basically by whatever the action we think we should take, we align to X, Y, and Z business drivers that lead to these business outcomes. So the example might be something like this. By promoting preventative care, we align with our commitment to customer health and cost-effective care, leading to improved health outcomes and reducing expenditures on chronic health issues. So something like that might be how we frame this exercise to executives or other stakeholders that may not be designers. And we're trying to use the language that they use so that we can do the work that we know we need to do. Okay, the next thing that we do is we create something we call behavioral profiles. This is a mixture of personas and jobs to be done and behavioral economics concepts. We're kind of squishing those things together because they have different uses, but collectively we find that they're really powerful. So what we try and do is we're trying to create these behavioral profiles that really lean into characteristics, behaviors, and needs. And this serves as a foundation for us so we can start to tailor what we call interventions. Interventions are how we overcome an individual's bias that causes them to make or to not make certain decisions. It's really what influences their behaviors. Now, this is the template that we like to use. At a high level, we'll walk through each piece. So we have segmentation that we'll use. These either come from marketing or they come from direct from personas. We're just trying to reuse some of the data that we already have. We'll also do some light information around socio-demographic information. This isn't the most important part, but it is valuable to sort of frame the segmentation that we're trying to target. And then we focus on goals. Now, I'm going to use a healthcare example for a lot of these because behavioral economics applies really well to the life sciences and the healthcare space. Now, when we think about goals, we're thinking of both short-term and long-term goals because we know that if we can support the goals, we can motivate customers or patients or users to take an active role in making decisions that will be of benefit to them. And then this is where the economics portion comes in from behavioral economics. What is the desired economic impact? So this is helping us understand their financial goals, right? So if I'm trying to get health care or do prescriptions or get a health plan or do my 401k or buy a product, what is the net economic benefit for them as a customer to perform an action that causes money to change hands? And then this is where jobs to be done sort of comes into play. These are the essential tasks or the actions that customers would expect to take when they're engaging with companies or products or services. Again, there's a bit of Mad Lib stuff in here. The way that we like to frame it is when a trigger happens, I want to take this action so that I can perform this outcome. Very simple flow. So it's easier for us as a team with the stakeholders to riff on the specific things that customers expect that they should be able to do in whatever the context would be. And then this is where the behavioral science portions really come into play. We're really trying to understand motivations. What motivates people to make or not make decisions? We break this down by the intrinsic motivators and then the extrinsic motivators. So intrinsic could be something around maintaining independence or improving health for personal reasons, if this is a healthcare example. The extrinsic, they could be financial incentives, social recognition, family encouragement, anything like that external that's causing them to make certain choices. The other group that we focus on is around social influences. Now, family, friends, community norms. We saw a lot of this with COVID, I think, not to dig up a really rough time, I think, in all of our lives. People made decisions largely not on science, but on social influences. What do their friends say? What do their neighbors say? What did the community say? What was the norm that would cause people to be vaccinated or not? Now, understanding those influences is really important as we try and influence behaviors. The other thing is the environment. So I live in Charlotte. We have what we call the crescent and the wedge, which is basically a very clear delineation on where the rich people live and the poor people live. When COVID happened, there were so many school-aged children in the crescent that were dropping by a McDonald's or a restaurant with Wi-Fi because everything moved online and they didn't have connectivity in their homes. So they would go to a fast food restaurant and they would do their homework there all day long. So as we're thinking of what prompts people to make certain decisions, the environment's also very important. This could be our physical or social environment that impacts those decisions. And then the last thing is just barriers to change. A lot of this is internal. What prevents me as an individual from making the right choice or the best choice? I have a lot of biases. You all have a lot of biases. And sometimes somebody somewhere has to nudge us to overcome those biases so we make the best decision. We're trying to identify those barriers to change here. So here's an example of a comorbid patient. So they have multiple chronic conditions, and they require ongoing medical attention and care, specifically in coordination. So this is what it would look like for them and how we would break this down. I'm not going to read through all of this, but we are trying to really understand, as a comorbid patient, what really drives their decision, what motivates them to do what they need to do, what's preventing them from making sure that they're getting the best health care they can. For anybody that has family members that suffer from comorbidity, it's really difficult to overcome some of those challenges, to maintain the energy to see to your own health care. And you need support sometimes. So this is the blueprint that we use that carries forward for, in most cases, 5, 10, 12, 15 different segments, depending on how large the product or services we're trying to build and who we're trying to target. Okay, once we do that, we start to really move into concepts of behavioral science and behavioral economics, where we're exploring what we call choice architectures. We're going to prioritize some actions, and I'll explain what that means. So when we think of choice architectures, this is the way or the mechanism that we use to influence how individuals make choices. I like to call it ethical manipulation because you're trying to manipulate people in a positive way that has a benefit to them from both physical, social, and economic point of view. So in healthcare, as an example, this can mean the difference between a patient engaging with a care plan or becoming overwhelmed with all the options and the choices and being disengaged. So there are core elements in choice architecture. One is sensible defaults. This also very tightly overlaps with some of the UX concepts that you're probably familiar with, where whenever we're giving people multiple choices, whether it's in a single page or multiple flows or multiple steps, sensible defaults really make a huge difference. If we can preset options that take into account what an individual really needs, it helps reduce the burden or the cognitive load on all the choices they could potentially use and give them sensible defaults. Second thing is choice over time. Structuring choices to highlight long-term outcomes mitigate some of the short-sighted decision-making that we have. And I feel like our attention spans have gotten shorter and shorter and shorter over the past few decades. We don't really think of the long game anymore. We do this as individuals. We definitely do this at like a big enterprise level. Any publicly traded company, they make decisions quarter to quarter. What decisions can they make to pump their stock price up for the quarter? And they're not really thinking 5, 10, 15, 20 years ahead. And neither are we as individuals. And that's unfortunate. So we struggle to highlight those impacts over time. The third thing is partitioning options or attributes, making it easier for people to understand the choices they've been given, what those choices mean, and ideally trying to remove any jargon that they may not understand. The fourth thing is avoiding attribute overload. This is where we try and balance the need for information against the cognitive load by simplifying the decisions and limiting the attributes that we're displaying. And then the fifth thing is translating some of those attributes. Uh, this is trying to make the attributes more understandable, right? How we describe the choices that they're given. If it's healthcare and we're using a lot of really specific technical healthcare language, unless you're a healthcare professional, you probably won't understand. Same thing for financial services or retail, etc. And in the industry, there are common terms that are very familiar for folks in that industry. But if you're outside of that industry, it may not make sense. So how do we translate those attributes to those descriptions so it makes sense to the everyday person? So this is an example of a choice architecture. This is a comorbid patient essentially going through the choice of choosing their care through a care management portal. This is actually a real world scenario that we sort of obfuscated a little bit from a client of ours up in the Northeast. Basically what happens is the patient visits the portal. The portal is typically poorly designed, and they're given a whole bunch of options that may not make a ton of sense. It's a lot of specific health jargon. It's not descriptive enough, or it's too descriptive, but it's not relevant information. They have to go to the next step where they're choosing the benefit options. There are typically multiple options under each care management option. Then they have to go in and fill out a bunch of enrollment forms, which nobody enjoys for whatever reason in healthcare. We just have a bunch of forms for every person, and it's all the same information over and over and over again. Then they have to provide additional information, typically, depending on who they are, where they live. They completed enrollment, maybe, and then they begin to engage. What most commonly happens is they make it to about step 2, they get confused or something's not working, and they have to go through and talk to an assistant. They have to call in. So they contact support. They're typically wait times. In a lot of cases, what's on the website and what the support team has is not the same information, so they're getting misinformation unintentionally sometimes, and then they kind of abandon enrollment, and then they disengage. So what we can do with something like that is we can apply choice architectures and identify, okay, we can definitely improve the first couple of steps where they're making a bunch of choices. We can also improve the step where they're filling out forms. Do they really need to provide additional information, or do we have that data already? Is it just the operations and the development of the portal being lazy and just asking information in additional forms, or do we really need the data? Same thing on the customer support track. Wait time shouldn't exist. We've got the technology to make that really simple now. Misinformation, same thing. There is no reason that a patient and support should have different information. It should be the same. So what we do, we're going to apply a few concepts. Concept number 1 is something we call nudge theory. There's actually a really good book called Nudge that talks about behavioral economics. Great book, short read, highly recommended. These are the subtle changes that we might suggest in a process or a flow or an experience like that, where we can reinforce through indirect suggestion that can influence people's decisions. Now, one of the key tenets of nudge theory is we're giving people choices, but we're never taking away their ability to choose. They should always have freedom of choice. So as an example, if there are 10 options, we only display 3 for whatever reason, they should still be able to opt in and see all 10, right? We still want to give them the ability to choose. So all this is about making their lives easier as they go through the process. So there's some standard cognitive biases that we use nudge theory to try and overcome. Status quo, anchoring, optimism bias, loss aversion, we talked about earlier. There's quite a number of these, and it's really fascinating as you start to apply them to process. The next thing that we do is once we identify the biases that we need to help them overcome, is we start to design interventions. Now, these are behavior change tactics that help us design those interventions that guide individuals towards better choices, healthier choices, more financially viable choices. So we use common tactics like goal setting, right? You see that in Duolingo. Feedback loops, you also see that in Duolingo a lot. Some of them are crazy, but they're fun most of the time. Social proof is another one that we use a lot when we're trying to influence people as they make decisions. There are a handful of others that are in there as well, but as we understand what those tactics are and how we can apply them, we can create strategies that encourage positive behavior and also help people sustain those choices over time. So what it would look like is if we took that first model and we changed it to something like this, we still have all of the care management options, We've just bucketed them, or we've sort of lumped them together, the ones that are most relevant to that individual because they're logged in, we know who they are, we have the data. We can give them the top 3 choices based off of what they've chosen in the past, based off their medical history, and based off of what they really should be choosing that's going to balance their need for healthcare versus the cost or out-of-pocket cost. Now, we hide the other ones, but they can still get to it if they want to. That's just done through the interface. Now, the second step, there's a lot of progress in how technology works now, where we can personalize the benefit program to them. Because, we have all that data. We don't have to have them manually go through and make a bunch of choices. We can give them personalized choices for that next step. Now, again, they can still go in and look at all the details and all of the various benefit programs, but we're giving them our best guess based off of what we know about them and their history. The forms, we clean that up. We make that more streamlined. If we have the data, we pre-populate so they don't have to fill it out a gazillion times. And ideally, they complete the enrollment more quickly, and they become more actively engaged. Same thing from the call center standpoint. The old school call centers, it gets tedious. It's heavy for both the customer and also the folks in the call center. If anybody's ever shadowed a call center, they are just on it all the time. What we can do now is we can allow them to do a bit more self-service with a lot of the AI tools that exist. We can make sure that we've trained a large language model on all of the policies, all of the information, and make sure that both the patient and the call center teams have access to the same data. So if they do have to talk to a human, then they can give them relevant information, and it's all the same information. So we're doing things like we're giving them sequential choice. We're layering that on. In the second bucket, we're applying sensible defaults. We know who they are. We know what they typically choose. We know what's going to make the most sense for them so they don't have to be overloaded by all the choices. We're using a bit of social proof as well, where people in your situation, in your area, have found the most benefit choosing this package versus that package. We're also using option bundling, right? So we're only giving them 3 options. They can still choose the others, but we're giving them the 3 that are most relevant to them. And then we're using attribute highlighting. What about those offerings makes them most relevant to that individual? So instead of a lengthy paragraphs and a bunch of bulleted lists, we pull out the ones that are most relevant to them. We know who this person is. Then for the personalized benefit program, again, we're using a bit of social proof to influence their decision. Then we're applying heavy personalization to give them the most relevant results. From a form standpoint, that's really just a simplification play. A lot of that data we probably don't need. A lot of that data we already have. The amount of data they have to put in is much, much smaller than what they realistically need. And then the complete enrollment, we layer on a couple of additional nudges. One are some incentives. We also leverage loss aversion. Right? We want to incentivize them to do this thing. We also want to make them very well aware of the potential healthcare or economic losses they might receive if they don't complete the enrollment. Poor health, higher healthcare costs, having to get something outside a plan. So that's how we typically try and do it. Now, once we do that, we begin to prioritize out of those sections, what behaviors do we want to focus on first? Now, I'm in consulting, so basic 2x2 on how we like to break this down. The first step that we use is really around scoring. We're trying to score specific use cases. We'll typically do this based on a couple different angles. One is customer value or patient value. What is the positive economic impact? Is clear and relevant information being shown as part of this choice architecture? Are we aligned with specific ethical behavioral drivers? And then are we applying the right level of simplicity and optimization of the info that we're displaying? From a business standpoint, how aligned strategically is this use case to the overall business strategy or the business unit strategy? How well does it enhance customer engagement or patient engagement? Does it support long-term relationship building? And then what is the financial impact to the company? So we slot those into a basic 2x2. That gives us a way to really score and categorize the use cases so that we know where to start. And then, I won't read all of this, but I'll make sure it's available to you all. This is how we evaluate the scoring criteria across each of those areas from basically a 0 to 3. It gives us some optionality. It also makes sure that we're really clear as a team collectively on how we're scoring each of those use cases. Once we have the use cases, then we can move on to our validation phase. We're trying to validate these interventions with customers, patients, users, consumers, whatever that nomenclature is. So this is a crucial portion that some companies tend to cut. They like to cut research for whatever reason. But it helps make sure that we're not just spitballing and we're doing valuable work. This also makes sure that the resources are channeled into the most effective use cases that will have the highest benefit to both the customer and to the company. And it's not just about confirming what works, but it's also learning about what doesn't so that we can refine our approach and reduce our overall risk as we get these things into production. So at a high level, some more Mad Libs because I really dig Mad Libs. One of the things that we do is we focus on a hypothesis. So the way that we try and frame this with stakeholders, basic Mad Lib statement, by implementing whatever the proposed intervention is, we can achieve this action to overcome these challenges for whatever the customer segment or segments are that will lead to these expected positive outcomes and it will achieve these measurable results, whatever the KPIs are that we're trying to align to. Then we can make sure we have the right resources aligned, whether that's marketing or recruiting or technology or business, whatever business groups need to be involved, make sure they're involved. We describe in detail what we're going to try and test, how we're going to validate the success or failure of that test, and then the fidelity and what tool we're going to use to test. Sometimes this might be in Figma. In some cases, we may do some sort of contextual inquiry. We're doing something in a physical space, if it's retail or a hospital. We might do something like a simulation study that we'll do fairly often if we're trying to mix digital and physical in the same space so that we can test both an environment and the digital tools that we're trying to incorporate in that environment. Okay, the last thing, and probably one of the most important things, is just around the ethics on all this stuff, right? We are manipulating people, but we're trying to do that ethically and do that in a way that provides a net positive benefit to them as the customer or the consumer or the patient. So what I would say about this is whenever we're applying concepts of nudges or choice architectures, we have to respect the individual's autonomy. We have to promote their welfare. We have to maintain transparency. We should tell them that we're going to try and influence their decision. We're not trying to hide anything. And we're trying to do this in a way that's going to impact them in a positive way. So to do this ethically, we have to safeguard against manipulative practices, which they happen, they shouldn't, but they do, to make sure that any nudges or any of these concepts are aligned with the best interests of the company's customers, not necessarily the company itself. So we break this down into 5 elements. The first one is basic questions that we ask ourselves when we're going through these use cases. The first one is, are we inhibiting somebody's freedom of choice? We try very hard not to coerce or constrain the range of options that somebody's presented. We want to make sure they can opt in or opt out easily. None of that should be hidden. We don't want to use dark patterns at all. Again, we're trying to help them make the best choice. We don't want to do that in evil ways. The second thing is, are we promoting their own welfare? So we also try and assess whether the nudges contribute positively to the health and well-being of the individual. We avoid nudges that benefit the organization at the expense of the person, the customer, the consumer. The third thing is, are we transparent in how we're influencing those choices? We disclose our intent behind what we're presenting them and how they function, right? No surprises. We want them to know exactly what we're doing and why. Fourth thing is, are we avoiding any deceptive practices? For any of the designers in the room, I'm sure you've been asked. If not, I'm sure you will be asked at some time in your career to do something that doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel ethical. We have to respect the individual's ability to make informed choices without applying deceptive practices. We have to make it clear and accurate so that the information that we're providing them is sound so they can make the best decision. We're not trying to manipulate them in negative ways. And then the fifth thing is the choice architecture design that we've presented equitable? We want to make sure that the nudges don't favor one group of customers over the other, unless it's justified. And there may be some scenarios where it's not exactly equitable because there are specific needs to specific demographics where they need something very unique for their circumstance. We want to avoid exploiting vulnerabilities of specific customer demographics, right? So that's our basic 5-question checklist that we ask ourselves whenever we're doing this work to make sure that we're being ethical as we apply these ethical manipulations. The last thing is, well, now that we know what we're doing and funnel things down, we have a subset of use cases that are going to have a massive positive impact to customers and to the business. We need to build something, we need to pilot it, we need to scale. That's a completely different talk on how that's going to work. So all that said, I'm going to wrap up with a few quick items. One of the things that I appreciate about behavioral design and how we apply this into the work that we do day to day is it's more than just a basic methodology. It's really about understanding and improving the lives of the people that we're building products and services for. And as we move forward, we want to continually strive to guide customer towards better decisions, healthier lives, better financial decisions. So a few key points to take away if you don't remember anything else. One is just basic understanding of behavioral economics. It's not magic, right? It requires work. It dovetails really nicely with some of the UX work that most of you are probably already doing. It's just another tool in the toolbox that we can use. Second thing is we want to always be insight-driven. We don't want to guess. We want to base our decisions and our choice architectures and our nudges based on actual data so that we can identify motivations, dismantle barriers, and clarify the choices we're presenting to people. 3 is just ethical influence. I've emphasized the importance of ethics in what we do here. We should apply these concepts to influence people's decisions ethically at all times. 4th thing is always being customer-centric or human-centric. That's really the core tenet of what we're trying to do with behavioral design, is the customer or the user or the person. They're at the heart of every decision that we're trying to make. And then 5, this is where the economics comes in again, is we need to have a net positive economic impact to the person. The thoughtful design work that we can do should lead to smarter choices, healthcare, financial, retail, whatever that is, that translate into economic benefits down the road for both the customer and the company. So I'm going to stop there. What questions do you have, if any? And we'll talk through them for a bit. I can't see you, but go ahead.
So when you talk about validating interventions, and I like the template for a hypothesis, I wonder if you could give us an example of a sort of specific example of how to test an intention, because that seems like a sort of hugely disruptive process. I don't mean in a bad way.
No, you're right.
It seems like very complicated and expensive to figure out how best to test those assumptions, to identify people to test them on, etc. So I wonder if you could sort of expand a little.
Yeah. I'll give you a couple of examples. I'll give you one in healthcare, one in financial services. So on the healthcare side, we were essentially training like a 100-person product team for a company to help them understand how to apply these concepts. That's actually where some of these use cases came, where one of their biggest challenges is their portal that customers engage with. So I would say it's like some of it's like usability testing plus a little bit, where this was a very heavy digital experience, where we go through the process, we break down how their current portal process works, how does somebody flow through. We identify the areas that could potentially benefit from applying behavioral design, and then we narrow that down to, I think we started with like 50 or 60 different ideas or use cases, narrow that down to 4 or 5. And there's always a balance, I think, where some of those use cases, it's going to take a little bit of time. We have to deliver value sooner, so we get the roadmap or the time to do the bigger things. So we're looking for like a mixture of quick wins, things that might take a couple of days or a few days to clean up the interface. So chunking is one of those things, right? Let's say we have 20 or 30 examples in the system. We could do one simple UI change and condense those down into 3 to 5, and then hide the other ones behind another interface element. Then we can test that to see how people flow through with some basic chunking. We can either do prototyping in Figma or the prototyping tool. It's kind of quick and dirty. So that's example one, right? We want to focus on some of those quick wins. What are going to be easy things that we can do from a UI standpoint that makes the process easier or simpler? The longer term example on that one would be call center, right? Making those changes means there's a deeper investment in AI. There's going to be a lot of change management and transition in the call center. And in those cases, we know that's going to take, on a good day, maybe 6 months to retrofit a call center, to use AI, to build a platform, to get the LLM trained, to get the new call center teams trained, to get all that into the interface. It just takes time. We have to tie that back to business value. And in that case, it's going to be a mixture of overall savings, because if we can offload a lot of what the call center does to a self-service chatbot and let the call center focus on the more problematic, challenging issues that need a human touch to resolve versus they spend most of the time answering basic questions that they should be able to find. That's how we try and quantify that.
Randomly assign a small percentage of people to almost like a proof of concept,
Yeah.
UI or chatbot or whatever, and then measure, okay, here's the people who the control group went through the normal process, here's the new process that we randomly assign, 1% of users.
Yeah, that's right. So there's like two stark contrasts to that. We're doing like guerrilla usability studies that are applying these concepts. We're using like basic Figma and trying to get 10 to 15 people in a room and just run through those flows. If we're trying to do something in a staging environment, we're just trying to funnel off traffic. Those I like because it's actual code, and we can do full segmentation and get larger quantities of data. We'll typically try and marry both. The latter example, we get a lot of what data. We understand what people are doing, but understand why. So we try and map that with actual conversations with people, and either like a contextual inquiry, simulation study, usability study, so we can get more details around the qualitative information that you don't get from just basic A/B tests or multivariate testing. Yes?
What kind of data do you collect? I mean, it's pretty obvious to track like applications and things like that, but do you use Google Analytics or other tools, or just more interested in what kinds of data you collect in that evaluation?
Yeah, really good question. So for the folks on the camera, the question was, what types of data do we collect and what platforms do we typically use? Google Analytics, anything like that. It depends on the company. Some companies are really mature and they have a customer data platform, they have a CRM, they have a lot of data. In most cases, at least in our experience, they have a lot of data that's either dirty data or data that they don't know what to do with, which is always an adventure. So when they are more mature and they have a lot of rich data that we can start to leverage, we're tracking a few things commonly. We're going to get basic clickstream data if it's digital that you would get through GA or Google Analytics or any other analytics platform. If they are logged in, they've authenticated, we know more about them personally. And depending on the company, it'll depend on the data. So if it's financial services, we're going to know a lot about their finances. If it's healthcare, we're going to know a lot about their health. If it's retail, we're going to know a lot about their purchase history, what do they buy, when do they buy things, what are those patterns. We can leverage that data. Again, it helps understand what's going on, but it doesn't necessarily understand why they're making certain decisions. So again, we always try and marry the what data with the why data that's more qualitative. We need to actually talk to people in some way. We are very careful to store any PII. So when we're personal identifiable information, anything that can link the person that's part of the study to their data, it's a big no-no in a lot of cases, especially in financial services and healthcare. That can get everybody in a lot of trouble. So we always anonymize any of the research that we do. and we have like legal, security, and compliance teams that sort of make sure that we're not getting ourselves in trouble. So we try and be really careful with the data that we do collect. We try and make sure that if we are collecting personal information, that it's anonymized, and we never link the actual candidate to the data. Does that help? Okay. Yes. Yeah.
So I can understand very readily walking through a process like this when launching a company, absolutely launching a new product.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the time, we're years between new products. We're launching features. So my question, and you may not even have a perfect, just like always, it's always contextual, but like I'd love any, I don't know, ideas you might have in how do we get the kind of insights we might glean from a study like this into developers and product developers, so that when they're making their day-to-day decisions, the end user is in mind. I love it, and just to say, like some of the things I really like, I think about things I do every day as a front-end developer.
Right.
I'm thinking about, okay, I've got this ticket to solve this problem. At our company, we have a really great flatter structure where a collaborative, it's not just like over the wall, here's pixel perfect. It's like we get collab with product. And so like I get to think about things like, okay, how do I group these options? What defaults do I pre-select? And do that in an ethical way with the different kinds of users who might be coming in. Like I love those questions.
Right.
Like, I would love to know how do I, if we took time as a team to glean some of this stuff, let's get up to date on our most common customer and other things. How do we keep that in front of each other? How do we, over the years, like a year from the day I forget about your talk, like how do I keep these principles fresh for our team?
That's a really good question. It's also really hard. It's nuanced because some of that has to do with culture. So if you're a smaller team, you're typically more nimble. You're working together more often. You have fewer silos. I love those environments because you can do so much more with much fewer people. And you're so much more closely aligned on what you're trying to do together. In larger enterprises, you have a lot of siloed teams where there's a team that's doing the research, there's a team that's doing the content, there's a team that's doing design or wireframes or prototypes, there's a team that's doing dev, a team that's doing data, and you're not really all connected at times because in some cases they're different P&Ls, different leaders, different BAUs. So in the enterprise, it's hard where you have to balance like quick wins and like the things that you need to do for your longer term strategy. There are a couple of things that I found helpful. One is something that I saw at a conference from somebody from Spotify that led a lot of their research and a lot of their behavioral science work. They put together these really nice presentations that talked about all of the rich research that they were doing. But what made that effective is they translated that to the language of the person they were presenting to. So they had a different view for business stakeholders or for marketing or for the technical team, right? We did this research. We learned these things. This is what it means for you, the leader of this business unit. This is what it means for you, the front-end developers that are working on this application. That's been really helpful because it takes really deep research information that can be fairly technical from a researcher standpoint and bubbles up the important things to the surface to the people that it's going to make sense to. The second thing that I found helpful, and your team may be doing this now, is we used to do sort of like a modified design critique, but it was for the whole team, where the researchers would come in, they would share the things that they've learned, they would talk about the prototypes they've been working on, they would talk about the insights specifically that they've been gleaning from this research. The development team would also be involved in those conversations. They would demo what they've been working on. And it's sort of like ad hoc whiteboarding, right? We're doing this stuff. We're learning this new information. How does that affect things that are coming up or things that are in progress or things that we've built? And how do we start to modify what's there? It's easier to do that on a smaller team or a more focused team or a vertically aligned team that's all working together on the same challenge. It all comes down to culture in a lot of cases. Yeah. Yeah.
The frequency, and it sounds like what you're saying is getting the information in front of the team and communicating it to the teams in a way that's helpful to them. But like, I don't know, like once a year, maybe like hey, let's all get together and revisit who we're doing this for, what if their profile demographics are, and let's think about the features we've been doing, the features that are in the pipeline. Or is this something like once a month?
Once a month, for sure, yeah. Like you want to keep it fresh. For us in consulting, it depends on the project and the client. Sometimes we'll do it bi-monthly, sometimes it's monthly, sometimes it's quarterly. It depends on how often we can get with the stakeholders. But if it's just us and just the team, at least once a month. Behavior change is hard, both on what we try and change from a customer standpoint and both our own behaviors and how we work together. And if it's only once a year, people default to old behaviors very quickly. So if you keep it fresh, if you're reinforcing specific behaviors, like you're essentially applying behavioral economics or behavioral science to how you work together as a team, to incentivize folks to make better collective decisions together. You're trying to nudge them, ethically manipulate them to collaborate, and think about how they're solving problems, not wholly differently, but a little bit differently by applying different tools depending on the situation. You're welcome. Yes?
And so, as we're building products for all of these things, what do people want, what adds value to their job or life? And so, we're naturally going to believe our products are beneficial. So, because it's a difficult, like, sort of judgment call. It's like, I'm really going to do these techniques to encourage them to do this, to change their behavior. But it's good for them because there's a sort of tautological going to think that more engagement, purchasing more, more of our product is going to be good for them, because design is good for them.
Mm-hmm.
But, the incentives is sort of like be biased in that direction. So they're like data-driven approaches to validate, like, is that actually happening? Like, do they regret it? Do they also agree afterwards? Oh, I'm happy with this. I'm glad I was going to help them do that path.
Yeah. So I'm going to give you like it depends. The way that we think about that is you're doing this work, you're getting customers to engage. They're doing something. We know they're doing something. We don't know if they're enjoying whatever they're doing. They're enjoying the product. Sometimes they have to do it. I go through healthcare process because I have to, not because I enjoy it. Like the experience is not great. Previous, during, or post. If you're selling a product or a service, and that service is fulfilling a specific need, your longevity depends on your retention of customers, right? And then the overall, what we call like lifetime customer value. So there are a few things that we can do, right? You can use your basic analytics data to understand what's happening as they're going through the site. What are they using? You can start to layer on additional data on what are they interacting with, how often do they interact with things. Again, it's a bunch of what data. If you have like an online forum or Discord or some sort of support mechanism where customers are being fairly open around what they're feeling, you can start to gauge sentiment. That there are a large number of sentiment analysis tools that are out there today that we typically try and use to understand what is the general sentiment. We try and tie some sentiment analysis to launches or releases. So like, let's say we have a mobile app and we launch a new release. We have a point-in-time data point and can check the ratings in like the app stores to see did our stars increase or improve. You have access to the APIs and all the comments. You can feed those comments through a sentiment analysis tool to give you a sense of how are people feeling post-release of something. But nothing is as good as talking to actual customers. If you get in the habit of, either doing usability studies or even just doing basic forums or conversations with customers to understand what do they like, what do they not like, what's working, what's not working, what types of improvements would they like to see. It gives you additional data on top of everything else that you have. Just with a word of caution, just because a customer says they like something or doesn't like something doesn't mean it's actually true. So you also have to kind of infer the meaning behind the words that they say. At least in the US, we don't like to hurt people's feelings, especially here in the Southeast, bless our hearts. So you may not get the full truth. That's one of the reasons that I really like usability studies or contextual inquiries. Because you observe what people do, you get to observe their behavior, you get to observe their facial expressions, you get to observe the tonality in their voice as they're going through a specific system or a process. So you're seeing what they do, you're seeing visibly where they're struggling, even though they may not articulate that they're struggling. You get a lot of really rich data from that too. So you have to combine a bunch of data points, I guess is what I'm getting at. Cool. I know we're at time. Okay. So thanks for coming out. Again, my name is Bermon Painter. You can find me online. I have really great SEO. There are 2 Bermons in the world. One is my father. I'm easier to find online than he is. I also do virtual office hours every Friday morning from 7 to 9. On Calendly, can talk to anybody. They're free. I love to chat about things. So give me a yell. Thanks, everybody.